The family courtroom was a cold, sterile box of dark wood and poor lighting, a place designed to make you feel small and insignificant. It felt a world away from the vibrant, sun-drenched streets of Rio de Janeiro just outside its heavy doors. I sat beside my lawyer, Isabella, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of fear and a desperate, maternal resolve. Across the room sat my ex-husband, Marcus, looking confident and impeccably tailored, a man completely at ease in this world of power and judgment. Between us, in the vast, echoing space of the courtroom, was the entire world, my 8-year-old daughter, Maya. This was not a legal proceeding, it was a battle for my life as I knew it. Marcus was on the witness stand, a masterful performer under the gentle, leading questions of his expensive, silver-haired lawyer. He painted a picture of himself as the stable, rational parent, the bedrock of our daughter's life. He spoke of his financial success, his structured home, his ability to provide consistency and security. He spoke of me with a carefully crafted, patronizing sadness, as if I were a tragic, beloved but deeply flawed figure. He was building a narrative, brick by meticulous brick, designed to portray him as the only logical choice for primary custody. Then, his lawyer shifted the line of questioning. "Mr. Santos," he began, his voice dripping with a false sympathy, "could you describe Miss Thorne's behavior since the separation?" Marcus sighed, a theatrical display of reluctance. He used a carefully chosen vocabulary of psychological assassination. He described my grief over the end of our marriage as erratic. He called my deep, maternal bond with my daughter overly attached and enmeshed. He twisted my every action, my every emotion, into a symptom of a larger, unnamed instability, the classic, misogynistic trope of the hysterical woman, unable to cope. The final, venomous blow was delivered with a surgeon's precision. His lawyer leaned forward and asked, his voice low and serious, "Mr. Santos, in your professional opinion as a successful business leader, and more importantly, as her father, do you believe Miss Thorne is stable enough to be the primary caregiver for a young child?" Marcus paused, looking at the judge with an expression of profound, feigned sadness. He held the silence for a beat, letting the weight of the question settle over the room. "Honestly," he said, his voice a quiet, devastating judgment, "no. I do not. I believe she is unstable." The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Unstable. It was the brand he had been trying to sear into my identity for years, the ultimate weapon to dismiss my feelings, my intelligence, my very being. I felt a wave of nausea, of pure, impotent rage. I looked at Isabella, my own lawyer, but her face was a mask of calm, her eyes fixed on the judge. She gave my hand a brief, reassuring squeeze under the table, a silent signal that I held in my memory. The narrative was his, for now. But the facts, the beautiful, irrefutable facts, were mine. As Marcus continued his testimony, a carefully curated performance of the concerned, rational man, my mind drifted back through the 15 years of our marriage. His accusation of instability was not a new tactic, it was simply the public culmination of a long, private history of gaslighting. I remembered the countless times he had dismissed my valid concerns as overreactions, my informed opinions as emotional. He had always been a master of a quiet, insidious form of intellectual bullying, a way of making me doubt my own mind, my own perceptions. It was a slow, corrosive poison that I had only begun to understand after I had left him. I thought of my career, the one I had so willingly and lovingly put on hold to raise Maya. Before she was born, I was on a promising academic track, my research in developmental psychology gaining recognition. We had made the decision together that I would be the one to stay home, to provide the stable, present parenting we both believed was so important in the early years. But as time went on, he had begun to subtly rewrite that history. Our mutual decision became, in his narrative, my lack of ambition, my failure to follow through. He had turned my greatest act of love and sacrifice into another piece of evidence for my supposed lack of focus. My decision to leave him had not been born from a single, dramatic act of betrayal, but from the cumulative effect of 1,000 tiny dismissals. It was the way he would interrupt me at dinner parties to clarify a point I was making, the way he would buy expensive, unhelpful parenting books after I had just explained a developmental milestone to him, the way he would call me sweet when I tried to engage in a debate about politics or finance. It was a slow, steady erosion of my identity, an attempt to sand me down into a simpler, more manageable version of a wife, one who did not challenge his own sense of intellectual superiority. Now, sitting in this courtroom, I understood the true, terrifying nature of his strategy. He was trying to do to the judge what he had done to me for years, to frame me as an emotional, irrational woman whose feelings were not to be trusted, whose intellect was secondary to her maternal instincts. He was building a case based on a caricature, a flimsy, misogynistic stereotype. And he was so confident in his own narrative, so used to me quietly acquiescing to his version of reality, that he had forgotten one crucial, life-altering detail. He had forgotten who I was before I was his wife. Isabella, my lawyer, had been meticulous in her preparation. She had not just gathered character witnesses and financial statements. She had spent weeks compiling a different kind of evidence, a history that I myself had almost forgotten, a history that was documented in transcripts, publications, and professional licenses. As his lawyer's cross-examination began, focusing on my emotional state, on my lack of a recent career, I felt a flicker of the woman I used to be, the academic, the scientist, the expert, begin to reawaken. The unstable, emotional woman he was describing was a character in his fiction, and the judge was about to read the author's biography. When it was my turn to be questioned by my own lawyer, Isabella was calm and methodical. She walked me through a typical day in my daughter's life, establishing with a quiet, irrefutable clarity that I was, and always had been, her primary caregiver. We spoke of school routines, of doctor's appointments, of parent-teacher conferences, of the small, intimate, and crucial details of a child's life. I was not emotional or erratic. I was organized, attentive, and deeply, knowledgeably involved in every single aspect of my daughter's well-being. The foundation of my competence was being laid, brick by factual brick. Then, it was his lawyer's turn to cross-examine me. His name was Mr. Alves, and his style was one of a condescending, paternalistic inquisitor. He paced before me, his questions designed to provoke an emotional response, to crack the calm, factual facade I had presented. "Miss Thorne," he began, "you haven't been employed in over 8 years, is that correct? Would you say you are fully prepared for the financial and emotional challenges of being a single parent?" He was trying to paint me as a kept woman, a fragile creature unprepared for the realities of the world. He pressed on, his questions becoming more pointed, more personal. "Your ex-husband has described you as being in a state of emotional turmoil since the divorce. Would you agree with that assessment? Have you sought any professional help for your instability?" He said the word with a slight, almost imperceptible sneer. I could feel the anger rising in me, a hot, defensive wave, but I met his gaze, my expression neutral, and answered his questions calmly and simply. I would not give him the emotional outburst he was so desperately trying to provoke. It was then that the judge, a stern, older woman with an air of no-nonsense authority, intervened. She had been listening intently, her expression unreadable. She held up a hand to silence Mr. Alves. "Counselor," she said, her voice a low, authoritative command that cut through the tension in the room. "I have a few questions myself. Your client, Mr. Santos, has testified under oath that he believes Miss Thorne is unstable and therefore unqualified to manage the emotional and psychological well-being of their child. Is that an accurate summary of your position?" Mr. Alves, looking slightly flustered by the interruption, confirmed that it was. The judge looked down at the thick file of documents on her bench, the file Isabella had so carefully prepared. She peered over the top of her reading glasses, first at Mr. Alves, then at a stunned-looking Marcus. "That's a very interesting and very serious accusation," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. She picked up a single, official-looking document from the file. "Because this court has before it a certified and notarized academic transcript from the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, confirming that Ms. Eris Thorne holds not only a master's degree in psychology, but also a doctorate, a Ph.D., in child development and behavioral psychology." She looked directly at me, and for the first time, a flicker of something that looked like a smile touched her lips. The silence that fell over the courtroom was absolute. It was a silence so profound, so heavy, that I could hear the faint, distant sound of traffic from the street outside. Marcus's jaw had literally dropped, his face a mask of slack, utter disbelief. His lawyer, Mr. Alves, looked as if he had been physically struck, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish. The entire, carefully constructed narrative of my incompetence, of my emotional frailty, of my being just a mom, had not just been challenged, it had been utterly and completely annihilated by a single, irrefutable, and glorious fact. A wave of feeling, so powerful it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. It was not just vindication. It was a reclamation. In that single moment, I was no longer Marcus's unstable ex-wife. I was not just Maya's mother. I was Dr. Eris Thorne, a woman whose entire academic and professional life had been dedicated to the scientific understanding of the very subject I was being questioned about. The years I had spent in libraries, in research labs, the thousands of hours I had dedicated to my education, they had all been lying dormant, and they had just been awakened with the force of an earthquake. The judge was not finished. She put down my transcript and looked directly at my ex-husband. "Mr. Santos," she said, her voice now laced with an icy, unconcealed contempt. "You stated that you are a business leader. An impressive accomplishment, to be sure. But could you please inform the court of your own academic qualifications and professional experience in the field of child psychology?" Marcus, who had been so confident, so articulate just moments before, could only stammer, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. I don't have any," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. The rest of the hearing was a mere formality, a slow, methodical demolition of what was left of Marcus's case. His lawyer's cross-examination of me came to an abrupt and fumbling end. Every accusation he had made now looked not just baseless, but utterly ridiculous. He had not just questioned a mother's stability, he had, in his arrogance, questioned the professional expertise of a leading academic in the field, and he had done so in a court of law, in front of a judge who now looked at him as if he were a particularly foolish and dishonest child. When the hearing was finally adjourned, I walked out of that cold, dark courtroom and into the bright, humid, and gloriously chaotic afternoon of Rio de Janeiro. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the air thick with the scent of sea salt and exhaust fumes, and I felt as if I was breathing for the first time in years. The legal victory was secondary. The real victory was a personal one. I had walked into that courtroom as a woman fighting for her child. I walked out as a woman who had, against all odds, reclaimed herself. The judge's decision, when it arrived a few weeks later, was a foregone conclusion. I was granted full primary custody of Maya, with Marcus receiving a standard visitation schedule. The legal battle that had consumed my life for the past year was finally over. But as the relief washed over me, it was quickly followed by a new, unfamiliar feeling, a restless, reawakened sense of purpose. The experience in that courtroom, the act of having to defend my own long-dormant expertise, had stirred something in me that I thought had been put to sleep forever. The academic, the professional, the psychologist, she was awake, and she was demanding to be heard. I had spent 8 years pouring all of my intellectual and emotional energy into being a mother, a role I cherished above all others. But I realized now that the two identities, mother and professional, did not have to be mutually exclusive. In fact, my painful, personal journey through the crucible of a high-conflict divorce had given me a new, powerful perspective, a real-world understanding that could not be learned from textbooks alone. I had not just studied the effects of divorce on children, I had lived it. I had a unique, hard-won expertise that I now felt compelled to use. My personal growth in the aftermath of the trial was a journey of professional rediscovery. I decided it was time to stop being a former child psychologist. With a newfound confidence that bordered on a fierce determination, I began the process of opening my own private practice. It would be a small, specialized clinic, dedicated to a single, focused mission, helping children and families navigate the treacherous, emotionally damaging waters of high-conflict custody battles. I would use my own story, my own scars, as a tool to help others. My lawyer, Isabella, who had been my stoic, brilliant champion in the courtroom, became my first and most ardent supporter in this new venture. She was more than just my legal counsel, she had become a friend, a mentor, and a fellow warrior. We were two professional women who had faced down a biased, often misogynistic system, and had won through a combination of meticulous preparation and unwavering belief in the facts. She began sending me referrals, her own clients who were in desperate need of the kind of specialized, empathetic guidance I could now offer. The obstacle of starting a career from scratch after nearly a decade away was a daunting one. But it was a challenge I now felt more than equipped to handle. I was no longer the woman who had allowed her husband's subtle dismissals to erode her confidence. I was Dr. Eris Thorne, a woman whose professional qualifications had been read into a court record. I was building a new future, not just for my daughter, but for myself, a future built on the solid, unshakable foundation of my own hard-won expertise and my own, unique, and powerful voice. Several months after I opened my practice, I received a phone call that was so unexpected it felt like a prank. It was from Mr. Alves, my ex-husband's lawyer. His tone was not the condescending, arrogant one I remembered from the courtroom, but was now a strange, humbled, and almost pleading one. After a few moments of awkward, stilted small talk, he got to the point. He was calling not as an adversary, but on behalf of a new client. He was calling, he explained, to request a professional consultation with me. The details of the situation he laid out were steeped in a profound and almost comical irony. My ex-husband, Marcus, and his new, much younger fiancée, were now embroiled in their own high-conflict custody battle. His fiancée had a son from a previous marriage, and her ex-husband was fighting for sole custody, using a playbook that was shockingly familiar. He was painting her as an unstable, emotional woman, unfit to be a mother, and he was using her new relationship with a wealthy, powerful man like Marcus as evidence of her supposed moral failings. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Marcus, the man who had so masterfully and callously tried to use the unstable mother narrative to destroy me, was now on the receiving end of the very same tactic. His own words, his own strategy, were being used against his new family. And now, in a moment of sheer desperation, having seen firsthand the power of real, verifiable expertise in a courtroom, he had sent his lawyer to the one person in the city he knew could effectively dismantle that argument. He needed me. He needed Dr. Eris Thorne. I was faced with a complex and difficult choice. My initial, visceral reaction was to say no, to take a deep, satisfying pleasure in his predicament. It would have been a justified, understandable act of karmic retribution. To watch him struggle, to let him be consumed by the very fire he had tried to burn me with, felt like a form of poetic justice. To help him would be to help the man who had tried to take my child from me, the man who had publicly and privately tried to destroy my credibility and my spirit. But then, I thought of the child, the innocent little boy who was caught in the middle of this new, ugly war. He was the one who would suffer the most from the lies and manipulations of the adults around him. My professional ethics, the very foundation of the career I was now rebuilding, demanded that I act in the best interest of the child. It was a test of my own principles. Was I a professional, guided by a code of ethics and a genuine desire to help children? Or was I just a woman motivated by her own personal history of pain and a desire for revenge? I made my decision, not for Marcus's sake, but for the sake of the child, and for the sake of the professional I was determined to be. I agreed to a single, one-time consultation, making it clear that my focus would be solely on the well-being of the child, not on the legal strategy of my ex-husband's new family. The meeting was a surreal, out-of-body experience. I sat in a conference room, not as the accused, but as the expert, providing a professional assessment of the case files, pointing out the fallacies in the ex-husband's arguments and suggesting strategies to center the child's emotional needs. Marcus sat there, silent and humbled, taking notes as I spoke. It was the final, definitive inversion of our old dynamic, and a quiet, somber victory for the woman he had tried so hard to diminish. A year has passed since that day in court. My practice is thriving. It has become a sanctuary for women and men who are being subjected to the kind of psychological warfare I endured. My book, A Practical Guide for Parents Navigating High-Conflict Custody Battles, was published 2 months ago and has been surprisingly successful. It is a testament to the idea that our deepest wounds can, with time and intention, become our greatest sources of strength and wisdom. My relationship with my daughter, Maya, is the center of my world, a source of profound, uncomplicated joy. She is a happy, resilient, and brilliant little girl, completely unaware of the brutal war that was once waged over her future. My relationship with Marcus has settled into a functional, if distant, co-parenting arrangement. It is not a friendship, but it is based on a new, hard one, and, on his part, slightly terrified respect for my expertise. He no longer questions my judgment when it comes to our daughter. I often think about that moment in the courtroom, the moment the judge read my qualifications into the record. It was not just a moment of legal victory, it was a moment of profound, personal rebirth. It was the instant I stopped allowing my ex-husband's definition of me to hold any power. I reclaimed my own narrative, my own identity, and my own voice. The woman he had tried to erase, the expert he had dismissed, was not just present, she was, and always had been, the most qualified person in the room. In courtrooms and in boardrooms, in classrooms and in families, women are so often labeled emotional or unstable when they dare to speak with passion, to fight for what they believe in. Have you ever been underestimated, your voice dismissed, your expertise ignored, only to have a moment where your true qualifications were revealed? Tell me about your own, "the judge read my degree aloud" moment in the comments below. Your story is a powerful testament to the resilience and brilliance that so often lies just beneath the surface of a world's condescension. If this story resonated with you, subscribe, and share it with anyone who needs a reminder to never, ever underestimate the woman in the room.